is what was spent on what others will consider opulence or extravagance. State House hospitality expenditure was a whopping 1.17 billion Kenya shillings. Office of the President, Deputy President hospitality expenditure was 1.05 billion Kenya shillings. Once again, what was spent on hospitality, cumulatively, that is the State House, Office of the President and Deputy President, gobbled up taxpayers' money, 2 billion Kenya shillings, that is more than 2 billion Kenya shillings. And also new vehicles were bought in Ruto's maiden budget, worth 548 million Kenya shillings. This is what is contained, once again, in the National Government Budget Implementation Review Report of financial year 2023-2024. And we ask, what became of austerity measures? Keep the conversation going via social media platforms, and I'll be sampling some of them. Now, as you can see also in screens, the travel expenditure rose by 7 billion Kenya shillings compared to financial year 2022-2023. Remember, Ruto's maiden budget began from financial year 2023 to financial year 2023-2024, and currently we are in his second budget. State House, in this case, domestic travel expenditure was 1.3 billion Kenya shillings, even as that of foreign travel was 298.2 million Kenya shillings. We also have figures of the national debt stock, that is at 10.56 trillion Kenya shillings. External debt, or what we owe external lenders, is 5.41 trillion Kenya shillings, while domestic is 5. Actually, the figures are the other way around. Domestic, it should be 5.41 trillion Kenya shillings, while external is now 5.15 trillion Kenya shillings, which is 51% and 49%. The debt repayment, that is for the financial year 2023-2024, what we spent was 1.7 trillion Kenya shillings. Domestic borrowing, 795.03 billion, while external borrowing, 705.70 billion. Pending bills, 516.27 billion Kenya shillings. Control of budget. According to the Auditor General, these pending bills, it's high time we consider them as the national debt, part of the national debt stock. 10.56 trillion. Now we add the 516 billion. That makes it around already 11 trillion Kenya shillings. Are you also holding that view or that position?
Technically, from the accounting point of view, it is true that the pending bills should now join the public debt. But legally, I can tell you that in the PFM Act, the pending bills were not anticipated. Yes. Pending bills, you will realize, is as much a reporting issue as a spending issue. And if you allow me, I'll explain that. In that, at the end of any accounting period, you can have legitimate bills that are outstanding. And this could be due to many reasons. It could be just because the invoice came late, or because some work was not quite complete, so you could not pay. So it is perfectly normal for invoices to come in after the end of the accounting period. However, these invoices should not be beyond the resources that are available within the entity. It must be something that was planned for. Now, you know very well that in our accounting system, there are no commitments that are made without a budget. So we should then be asking, if we always commit when there is a budget, why do we have the pending bills left year after year? So there is something wrong with the reporting, in that we are not matching the pending payments with the pending receipts. Right now, the government has been accounting using cash basis. So on cash basis, we only take into account what has actually been paid in cash. So we do not accrue expenses that are pending or revenues that are expected. So in terms of reporting, that creates a problem, and that's why we have pending bills. But there is a deeper problem where you find that even if we accrued the receipts that we expect and compare that with the pending bills, there'll be no relationship. That's where the problem is.
Could be launching projects or actually bringing on board tenders that were not initially budgeted for?
No, they were.
Or we are surpassing what was budgeted for?
We are surpassing. They actually may have been budgeted for, but the revenues don't come in as expected. I'll give you a good example. Say you have a 20 billion budget for revenue. For instance, Nairobi County budgets at 20 billion revenue. So they make commitments based on that 20 billion. However, at the end of the period, they only collect
12 billion.
So what do you think happens between the 20
so
and the 12?
So they create pending bids of 8 billion.
Absolutely.
In averting that, is it proper, even for counties especially, when we predict that we are going to experience shortfalls,
yes,
we immediately go back and slash our budget?
Okay. Let's just say that at the very first instance, when you're making the estimates, you could have very high hopes. But those hopes must be based on solid assumptions. Now, if you then make those assumptions, then you must follow through to ensure that those assumptions are still correct within the year. Let's say you come to December, after 6 months, you must be checking your revenues and saying, if we have achieved so much in 6 months, we are not likely to get to the 20. Or we indeed shall get to the 20. And so you should limit your commitments to whatever is actually available. And it is the same for national government. You know, the estimates for the revenue are a lot higher than what we actually achieve.
Could that be a budgeting issue in terms of, do we first of all beginning with what we need, then what we can borrow, and the remaining we tend to now perceive it as our revenue targets, yes, or beginning with what we are capable of raising, if it also is revenue or ordinary revenue, then now budget from what we are able to raise in terms of creating the budget. Is it a budgetary process issue?
So it is partially and to a great extent a budgeting issue, and you've seen it live. Normally we look at the spending side. We put together the wish list and then we say, how are we going to finance this? So they don't go together. That's why, for instance, you saw that by the time the finance bill 2024 was being prepared, we already had the expenditure side.
So which one should come first?
They should kind of move concurrently. Even though the finance bill can come later, but it must, the spending list should be informed by the revenue side. But you will observe that the revenue side has a lot of unknowns. It has a lot of assumptions. But the expenditure side is usually well known. We know what we want to do. So if at the end of the period you find that we haven't achieved those targets revenue-wise, then definitely expenditure suffers. And the expenditure which suffers is mostly the development side. Now the development side will suffer in more than one way. Both the fact that we may not take up as many of the projects as we thought, or for those that we have taken up, we then don't pay for them on time, so we end up with pending bills. So that is the scenario that we have. So you know that the government is now moving into accrual accounting. And in accrual accounting, we'll be expecting to see both sides of the table. We'll be expecting to see that you owe so much, but you are also owed this much. So any difference between those two is then going to be very serious. So we do not expect to be seeing deficits in government reporting. It
So
is
basically we should have zero deficits.
we should have zero deficit or even surplus. We'll be expecting to see you collecting more than you are spending.
So if 516 billion is what we have as pending bills for the national government, and the Auditor General thinks that we should consider them as part of the debt, the public debt stock. How about pending bills in counties, which are more than 156 billion as of the figures that were there lastly?
Well, what I can say on that is that pending bills are not going to be part of the public debt, at least for now. There was a plan to take public debt in form of a bond to securitize the pending bills, but that was dropped. Parliament did not pass that bill. If they had passed it, then probably the government would have borrowed some more and then paid off the pending bills and then continued borrowing, repaying the bonds. But there would be a bit of a complication in that, in the sense that public debt is supposed to be taken for development. Now, the stock of pending bills we have is not necessarily all development. Some of it is actually recurrent. So you wouldn't take long-term debt to pay those recurrent bills. But I want to hold my decision on that, awaiting the report of the task force on pending bills. And I'm sure they'll be giving recommendations on what they think should be happening. I am aware that no funds were allocated to settle pending bills for this financial year. So I do not know what the plan is, because that is outside my purview. Probably the National Treasury can tell us that. Yes.
You've mentioned something around if we are to borrow, then it should be for development.
Yes.
Is that what the law says?
Yes, that's what the law says.
But now, according to your report, we borrowed domestically 795 billion Kenya shillings, while externally 705 billion Kenya shillings. That's a total of 1.4 trillion Kenya shillings.
Yeah.
But on how much is spent on development was only 516 billion Kenya shillings.
Yes.
Does it mean the government borrowed to spend on the current?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, Chacha.
So we have violated what the laws provide.
Well, we are not in court. So about violation, I would rather let somebody else decide that. But from the figures, what you can see is that what we borrowed did not go to development. Part of it, at least partially, the borrowing went to budget support.
Interesting. During the period, of course, with the 2.3 trillion revenue that we were able to raise, on how it was spent, and it's the question that we ask, what became of austerity measures? There was a circular that was issued by the head of public service.
Yes.
That no travel. What happened to that? What did your report actually unearth?
So the report, which is, you should tell the public that it is on the website and it is available to all the citizens. The report shows that the austerity measures.
But how come previously we were not having these reports? Was it opaque?
No.
And now you've streamlined it.
You know, we have the new constitution, so maybe that is the difference. But sometimes my office monitors on a quarterly basis what is happening. We may not know how the situation will be at the end of the financial year. But if you go to my 6-month report, that is the December report, and the 9-month report, all of which are on the website, you will see that I raised red flags in terms of that spending. So it didn't just come all of a sudden. It was happening all year round. Now you might say, how did this happen? How was the budgeting done? What I observed is that at the supplementary, we had supplementary 1 and supplementary 2. At both times, there were a lot of reallocations by the MDAs. So funds were being moved from where they were initially budgeted for and being moved to certain other areas.
After you released them?
No. Mm-hmm. You see, there is the approved budget. That is the budget that is approved at the beginning of the year. So we have an Appropriation Act. Right now, it started from 1st of July. We are now in September. So the MDAs look at the amounts that they have budgeted and they decide that they would like to spend the money elsewhere. Yeah?
Why is this elsewhere? Critical?
No, they indicate.
Or less critical?
They indicate where they want to spend it, but that is not where it was initially budgeted. So there is the issue of reallocation. So reallocations move the money from the initially budgeted areas to other areas. And the law says, as long as they are within 10%, that is allowed. But sometimes, for bigger MDAs, 10% is a lot of money. Then, you will also find that there is what we call Article 223. And these are additional requests over and above the original budget. Yeah? So all those, again, they go towards increasing spending on certain areas. So by the time we do the final year report, we are now taking stock of all those changes, the minuses and the pluses, and then we give you the final position as at the end of the financial year. But at the end of every quarter, we have been reporting the trends. And if you go back, you will see the trend for traveling has been up in each of those quarters. Yes.
And actually, it rose by 7 billion Kenya shillings.
Yes.
Compared to the previous financial year.
Right.
And at some point, State House would use 1.35 billion on domestic travel. Could the figures go down?
I don't know. I really can't tell you that. Mine is to report. I think what I provide is information for informed decision making. Right now, you know that today we are launching the budgeting cycle for this year. Now, I did provide the information to the National Treasury for the budget policy statement. So I expect that they are looking at those figures and saying they now would like to move in a certain direction. So as far as I'm concerned, they have the information now to make the right decisions. Mm-hmm. Yes.
The circular, for instance, had limited the delegation of Cabinet Secretary, that is a Cabinet Secretary plus 2 others, and even the number of days were capped
right
to at least 7 days, inclusive of travel dates. Mm. Was that adhered to?
In some circumstances, yes. In some, no, as you have seen in the report. And again, my office is not the one that enforces. All the MDAs have accounting officers who are responsible for those decisions. So if they did not adhere to that circular, then I believe the officers, the accounting officers will be answerable to whatever they have done to the spending.
So do you flag the spending on travel?
What we do, and this is constitutional, is that I report. I make sure that everybody understands what happened in the budget. So once I have done that, the responsibility now moves to another arm. For instance, the Auditor General is now going to move in to audit those specific areas where these tendencies have been reported. Administratively, I also expect that from where the circular originated, they are going to find out why it was flouted. Yes.
On your
I am the
observations-
teacher that gives the report card. Yes.
On your observations on the foreign travel data,
Yes.
what did you unearth?
On the foreign travel, again, I won't repeat what is in the report, because we can read that for ourselves. But you will observe that there are instances where the parties, the number of people traveling was very high. We also observed instances where different groups were going to the same destination at various times in an uncoordinated manner. So whatever guidelines that had been given in the circular were not being followed. Yes.
And what are your recommendations?
Well, we recommend that once a circular is drawn up, it becomes like law. So it needs to be followed. And if it's not followed, of course, that circular itself gives the consequences for not adhering to those guidelines.
We take a break at this point. Stream in your feedback via social media platforms at K24 TV, at Joel Chacha. When you come back after the break, we'll be highlighting on what these, there are some expenses I refer to as other expenses that gobble taxpayers' money. 145 billion. She'll be telling us about that, even as we also highlight on other matters in the report, including if there was misuse of Article 223. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.